All right, for this one, we're heading back in time to 1930s Cleveland. The Great Depression has its grip on the city, things are bleak, and in the darkest corners, a new kind of horror is about to crawl out of the woodwork. It's a story that will stump the most famous lawman in America and leave a scar on that city that, honestly, has never really healed. To really get the sheer terror that was gripping Cleveland, you don't have to look any further than their own newspapers. I mean, listen to that. This wasn't just crime reporting. This was a city screaming out in fear of a monster they couldn't see, a fiend who haunted this place called Kingsbury Run. So how does a nightmare like this even begin? Well, it wasn't some big, sudden event. It started with a series of really gruesome discoveries that at first just seemed like isolated, awful tragedies. But it didn't take long for police to realize they were dealing with something way, way more sinister: the careful, repetitive work of a single, savage killer. Just look at this timeline. It shows you how things got bad fast. It starts in 1934 with a woman's torso, which had been treated with a chemical preservative, washing up on the shore. Bizarre. Then a whole year goes by. Silence. Then, bam, September 35, two headless men are found. One of them is finally identified as Edward Andrassy, which gives this horror a real name. And by early 1936, the killer is getting bold. The butchered remains of Florence Polillo are just left in baskets for anyone to find. You can see it right there. A pattern of death was becoming terrifyingly clear. So what exactly was this place, Kingsbury Run? Well, it wasn't some nice little neighborhood, that's for sure. Think of it as a derelict gash running right through the city, a forgotten place for forgotten people. It was just a mess of weeds, trash, and shacks, home to the hobos and transients who were hit hardest by the Depression. And for a killer, well, it was the perfect hunting ground, filled with victims that almost nobody would miss. So as the bodies start piling up, the city's fear just explodes into full-blown panic. Everyone, the public, the police, they started to recognize the killer's calling card. This wasn't random. No way. This was the work of a ghost who had a very specific and very gruesome method. And that method was horrifyingly consistent. The victims almost always beheaded. Their bodies were taken apart with a skill that screamed medical or anatomical knowledge. He preyed on the poor, the marginalized, people living on the fringes of society. And he didn't even try to hide his work. He'd leave the remains right out in public, like he was taunting the entire city. The key thing here is that the police knew they weren't just looking for some thug. They were hunting for someone with the skills of a surgeon. And he used this precise, brutal method again and again and again. Over 4 terrifying years, the official tally rose to 12. 12 men and women decapitated, dismembered, and just discarded. And remember, that's just the official count. Who knows how many more there were? It was a staggering number for a single phantom killer. This wasn't just a Cleveland problem anymore. The Mad Butcher became this horrifying national sensation. It was a huge source of shame for a major American city. The story even went international. Get this, the Nazi-controlled press in Germany actually used the killings as propaganda, pointing to Cleveland as this example of a chaotic, decadent American society where a serial killer could just run free. So, with the city terrified and its reputation getting dragged through the mud, the whole mess falls into the lap of one man, a guy whose name was already a legend in American law enforcement. And this set the stage for an epic showdown, the nation's most famous crime fighter versus a killer who was basically a ghost. I mean, the feeling in the city was just pure desperation. The police were hitting one dead end after another. People were afraid to walk the streets, so they pinned all their hopes on Cleveland's new safety director, a man who had famously faced down the Chicago mob, Eliot Ness. And what a matchup it was, right? On one side, you've got Eliot Ness, the untouchable, the hero who took down Al Capone. And on the other side, the Mad Butcher, a killer who left no fingerprints, no witnesses, no clues, nothing. Ness was famous for hunting the most powerful criminals in the country, but now he was hunting a complete unknown. Ness threw absolutely everything he had at this case. He put together a huge task force of cops and medical experts. They'd chased down hundreds of leads that went nowhere. A magazine even offered a $5,000 reward, which was a fortune back then. But the desperation led to a really controversial move. In August 1938, Ness himself led this massive raid on Kingsbury Run, arrested dozens of vagrants, and then he had their entire shantytown burned to the ground. The justification? He was, quote, depriving the killer of his prey. But even with all that pressure, all those resources, every single lead just seemed to go cold. The whole investigation became this frustrating, winding journey through a maze of possible suspects, and each one just led to another brick wall. And the most tragic of these dead ends is the story of Frank Dolezal. He was a bricklayer, knew a couple of the victims. After 2 solid days of intense questioning, he signs a confession. But the confession was full of holes. The details just didn't match the evidence. He later took it all back, saying the cops had beaten it out of him. And then, before he could even get to trial, Dolezal was found dead in his cell, hanged. But the autopsy showed he also had 4 broken ribs. Was it really suicide, or was it something else? We'll never know for sure. But in his own mind, Elliot Ness had his guy, a Dr. Francis Sweeney. I mean, he fit the profile perfectly. He was a physician, so he had the anatomical skills for those clean dismemberments, and he also had a history of psychiatric problems. For Ness, he was the only one who made sense. But here's the final, infuriating twist. Just a few days after the last official victim was found, Sweeney voluntarily had himself committed to a psychiatric hospital. He stayed in institutions for years, and while Ness was totally convinced he was the killer, he could never, ever find enough evidence to prove it. Sweeney died in 1964 and took whatever secrets he had to the grave. So where does that all leave us? With the top suspect gone and the trail completely cold, the case just morphed into one of America's greatest unsolved mysteries. The butcher terrorized Cleveland for 4 years, and then, poof, he was just gone. Yeah, this final case file really tells the whole story, doesn't it? A 4-year reign of terror, 12 official victims. But look at this, only 2 of them were ever identified. Think about that for a second. 10 human beings were murdered so brutally that their very identities were just erased from history. And the most chilling number on here? 0 convictions. To this day, the case remains unsolved. After 1938, the killings just stopped. The lead detective was finally pulled off the case in 1942. The Mad Butcher, whoever he was, either died, got locked up for something else, or maybe just decided he was done. He vanished just as mysteriously as he appeared, leaving nothing behind but a legacy of pure fear. And so we're left with the one question that's haunted Cleveland for almost a century now. Was it the tragic Frank Dolezal, maybe beaten into a false confession? Was it the disturbed and brilliant Dr. Sweeney, hiding in plain sight? Or was it someone else entirely? Some ghost who walked the streets of Cleveland and was never, ever even a suspect? Who was the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run? That's a question that, in all likelihood, will never, ever be answered.